am first. I love Buffalonians who come out when the weather is 2 degrees to talk about a book. It's really a wonderful book, and I'm so glad you're all here. And I know at the far end of the table are some news people, so I'll share very quickly that our book club has been in existence since 2011. Wow. We started by reading books that Charles Birchfield read just to see what he was all about, what his taste was like. But we very quickly made a pivot to reading works written by Western New Yorkers, which is in theme with our mission to support the many artists. We're okay. Thank you. The many artists of Western New York, including authors and poets, etc. This is only the second time we have moved away from a Buffalo author to an author who is writing about Buffalo. The first one was Peter Roth. He actually wrote to us first and said, can I have permission to use Birchfield images illustrating my book? And we said yes, and he came. The second one is here tonight. It's an incredible book called Cold Heart. If you haven't read it, I'm sure that you will before the end of the evening. We do meet the first Thursday of every month, and I invite you to come back and have an opportunity to meet more authors. They are always here with us, sometimes online, like Miss Tilley is, and many times in person. So there's coffee and water and cookies galore. So please help yourself anytime you like. Of course, there's wine. I see many of you found that. And I'm happy to turn it over to my friend Mary Tilley, who's going to introduce the author. I do apologize that Lisa Redmond was not able to be with us tonight. She caught the flu and she sends her apologies, but she'll be back with her own book in the very near future. So I just want to make sure you understood that she feels really terrible about leaving us, but I guarantee it's going to be a fun night. So Mary?
Okay, well, I'm going to introduce Kimberly to you. Now, Kimberly, she unearths fascinating forgotten true stories that took place during the early 19th century. She is the author of 4 Amazon category best-selling books in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom and Australia. She is currently working on her 5th book, which I'm excited about, and which will be out later this year. Now, Kimberly is also the co-founder of Pivot Talent Development. Pivot designs and delivers training, workshops, performance coaching that drives engagement and empowers individuals to unlock their potential. Now, Kimberly lives in San Francisco Bay Area and joins us here tonight to talk with us about her book, Cold Heart, The Great Unsolved Mystery of the Turn of the Century Buffalo. Now, for those of you who haven't read it, the story concerns the 1903 murder of Ed Burdick at his home on Ashland Avenue in Buffalo. This is a true story that has stumped investigators for over a century. Well-known and well-liked Mr. Burdick had been beaten to death in his den one night in an upscale neighborhood while his family slept upstairs. The murder investigation soon revealed Ed Burdick was at the center of a lurid scandal involving Buffalo's young elite, and a number of well-known Buffalonians were suspected of having played a part in Ed's murder. So that's a nice little tickler for you. Anyway, all right, well, I'm going to turn this over to Kimberly, and I want to welcome you from all of us here in cold Buffalo.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to it. And I want to thank you all for coming too, because I want to spend an hour of your afternoon or evening to talk about this mysterious death. There's a lot to it, and we're not going to get through everything tonight, but we are going to talk about some of the more puzzling aspects of this crime. And I have a little presentation I created for you. If you've read the book, you might notice things are in a slightly different order than you recall. And that's because I thought it would be fun if we could all look at it together through the eyes of the police detectives at the time. So if you haven't read the book, no problem. We're all kind of starting from the same place. Let's see. Do I have the share permission? It looks like I do.
Yes, you do.
All right, wonderful. So let me pull up this little presentation. One thing I want to tell you is that Ed's death, this particular murder was, oops, it's going way out of me here. Sorry about that. Um, Ed's murder was really a product of its time and place in history. And I don't think that this would have happened somewhere else or even at a different time. And at the time, the United States was a really exciting place to be. All kinds of things were being happening that had never happened before. And I'm talking about shattering barriers that existed since the beginning of time. So all of a sudden, we have flying machines, automobiles, and we're still innovating on those things now. But when they created these things and invented these things, they're the first time they'd ever existed in the course of all humanity. So that was the United States. But Buffalo had a particular role to play. And one of the most important inventions, I would say, is like the invention of the electric light and having things that were lighted up outside. Up until this time, the streets were pretty dark if you were walking down most streets during the evening. And I have a little video here. It's my only video because I know it makes the presentation slower, but it shows some of the electric lights that were happening at the Pan American Exposition that Buffalo hosted in 1901. And it just gives you some idea of how massive the scale of it was. And at the time, this was a world that was lit only by fire. So people didn't have any idea about electric lights. They didn't have electric lights in their home. It was mostly candlelight. Some people had gaslight, but most people had candlelight and firelight. So this was really something. And Buffalo had always been an important city in the United States. Like it was a major industrial city. The country depended on it for a lot of things. But after this fair, that's when Buffalo became a phenomenon, even overseas. The electric light wasn't the only thing that they had debuted there. They were also talking about like all the great jobs and the innovation in the industries and things like that. And so people came from around the world to come and live and work in Buffalo. Everybody wanted to be part of what was happening there. You see here, I just have a couple pictures for you. These beautiful buildings, the beautiful architecture at the time. And you could see it was the really like Buffalo's golden era of architecture. The homes were beautiful too, but the public buildings were amazing. And the streets were unusually clean. This was something that I found to be very interesting about Buffalo. And I think it was a reflection of how much people cared about their city and how proud they were of it because the streets were very clean and the crime was unusually low, even compared to cities like Cleveland, which is where I grew up. So I'm a little bit familiar with these industrial cities and Pittsburgh. So like there was no contest between those cities in terms of cleanliness and low crime. If you were in Buffalo at the time, you would see a lot of the industry happening around you. You would hear the factory whistles and the steam whistles. You would hear people shouting in different languages. It was a really happening, exciting place to be. And you would hear people shouting in different languages because everybody had come to Buffalo. One side effect of all of this was that with so many mills and so many shipyards and all of these things that Buffalo had going on, they also had a very small group, and they were more like the people who owned the factories and owned the mills. They were the professional class. They had doctors and lawyers, those types of people, and they were living in the Elmwood Avenue district. That was the popular place to be. And I found this picture last month. I was so excited to find it. This is actually Elmwood Avenue when it was being built up. And so you see the three houses on the right are completed and the three on the left are not. And it's just, I don't know, it's interesting to me to see something like the houses that had been there forever and what it looked like before they were there. So those are the kinds of houses that they're building, and these were all single family homes at the time. And let's see. So let's go right to the murder. And like I said, we'll investigate the background a little bit when we get to it with the police. But we'll check in to share our thoughts then. The police were notified by Dr. John Howland. You see his picture here. He called the police from a telephone in the Burdick's home to report the homicide that had happened there. The police would have been very familiar with this area, not because they were called down there all the time, but just because it was where a lot of the cool things were happening at the time. And they knew of Ed Burdick. He was a prominent guy. People, and he was very well liked. He was a very kind guy, a very generous guy. And he'd come from humble beginnings himself. So I don't think that he had a lot of arrogance about him. And the people who knew him genuinely liked him. And he was 40 years old at the time, and he was the president and co-owner of the Buffalo Envelope Company. So he didn't have like a scandalous life or anything like that. From the outside, it would so seem. The coroner estimated that he had died in the den of his home around 2 a.m. that morning. So it's February 27th. The reason that the police would have known a little bit about Ed was because he was part of this upper crust group. He and his wife, Alice, who you see next to him there, they were known as very fashionable people. They were kind of small stature people, but they were excellent dressers. So Alice reminds me a little bit of Nancy Reagan. She has kind of this particular look to her with her collars and stuff, but she was always immaculately dressed. They were founding members of a dance, they did like ballroom dancing and that kind of thing, waltzes, and they spent a lot of time there. They were founding members of this Red Jacket golf club, and the Blue Bloods, the people who were the children and grandchildren of the robber barons, they had their own club, but this was where these newer rich people were hanging out and spending their time. And a lot of people wanted to be part of that. And just to give you an idea, Ed and Alice had a car in 1901. And I was curious, like, what that meant. What does that tell us about them? And what it tells us is that they had quite a bit of money. The most inexpensive model of a car then would have cost about $675. However, they could go all the way up to $2,100. And to give you some context, though, the average person would make about $412 a year working full time. So that would have been out of reach for most people in Buffalo. There weren't that many people with cars. So that's why I think they might have known who they were. There were also their friends who were equally well known. Ed's best friend was Arthur Pennell here. Arthur was a lawyer. He had such a romantic history. He had been born on his father's ship in the South Pacific. His father was a sea captain. So he came to the United States, and he went to Yale, and he graduated with a law degree. And he was just known as he really valued his reputation. And he was married to Carrie Lamb, and she was the leading socialite in Buffalo. So everybody would have known about her. They also were friends with Gertrude and Seth Payne. Gertrude Payne is probably like one of the funnier people in the book. She's a little bit conceited, and she was very much into dazzling everybody with her beautiful clothing, and she had this furniture that was wonderful. Her home was very stylish, and she was married to Dr. Seth Payne. He was a dentist, and he spent his weeks in Batavia, and he would only come home on the weekends. It wasn't a commutable distance then. And although he was coming home and seeing all these lovely things, it never occurred to him to question how they were affording it. And they were affording it because Gertrude was borrowing all that money from Ed. And it was one of those situations where it's like, we're saying that I'm borrowing it, but we both know I'm never going to pay it back. It was one of those situations. So there was no intent probably for her to, refund him for any of this. And the last couple were J.B. and Helen Warren. And this one is kind of tricky because Ed really liked Helen. He really liked her. I don't think anything was happening between them, but he liked her a lot. And the Warrens were not, their marriage wasn't very happy. And so they moved to Cleveland, I suspect to get away from some of these people and to get away from some of the environment. But it didn't really deter Ed. He went to Cleveland, I think twice at least, to visit her. He wanted to see her. And J.B. Warren had told his wife and his mother-in-law not to talk with Ed. So he just was not a big fan. And it's not really clear why he thought that, but it was evident to everybody that Ed really liked Helen. So let's get back to what else the police were looking at the scene. So in this picture here that you see the white cross here on the ground floor? Yeah. Okay. So that's the outside of Ed's den. And if you are looking at the house straight on, that's where the external entrance would be. They quickly established, because first thing the police want to know is like who else was in the house, you know? And they found that there were 6 other people. Ed had 3 daughters with Alice. There's Marion, she was 15, Carol's 13, and Alice is 10. His mother-in-law lived there with him. Her name was Mrs. Hull, Alice's mother. And then they had the family cook and the maid. So Maggie was from Ireland, and I believe Katie was from Germany. And they lived full-time with the family and had full-time work there. So they were living pretty well. And I believe this house is still there, but I believe it's divided into like 4 or 5 apartments now. So you can imagine how large it is for just one family.
It's 96.
Yeah. Um, Alice Burdick was not present. And that was something that they asked. They said, well, where's Mrs. Burdick? And they were told that Mrs. Burdick was in New Jersey. And she was in New Jersey because she was awaiting the final, dissolution of their marriage. They were supposed to be divorced the following week. And she was living there. And for the time, it would be about 7 hours trip for Alice to make it from New Jersey to Buffalo. So she wasn't really a suspect in all of this, not directly anyway. And we're going to talk about the crime scene, but I always like to picture the area around it before I get into like, well, who was where. So this is their police sketch, their original sketch of the den. And you see right by the door, there were 2 golf sticks. You also see a chair, a bookcase, table, 2 windows, and then a large couch. And Ed's trousers and his underwear and stockings and all that were at the end of that piece of furniture. So let's go ahead and we're going to talk first about the victim. And don't worry, there's nothing gory in here in terms of pictures. So don't worry about that. This is Ed. This was his last formal picture. And he was struck 12 to 20 times with a heavy object. And part of this comes from the coroner who was there, and also the family doctor was there to talk with them. So he was struck many times. The coroner said that the initial strike probably came from behind, so the back of his head. And you have to figure then that Ed had his back to this person. 2 fingers on his left hand were broken. And this is significant because one of the things that the coroner said was that the first strike would have killed Ed. It would have killed him. It would have taken maybe a few minutes, but he was still conscious enough to like raise up his hand and try to ward off another blow. And that must have been when his fingers were broken. His head was wrapped up in a quilt, so you really couldn't see the damage right away. And except for an undershirt, his body was naked and he was covered by pillows. And as Dr. Kozin mentioned, Detective Lisa Redmond was going to be here tonight, and I'm so sorry she's sick because I really enjoy talking with her. But I did have a chance to talk to her a little bit and show her this part of the presentation. And I asked her at the time, why do you think Ed was continually struck like that? And she told me that it could be 2 things. The first thing would be that they were probably afraid that he would reach for something to defend himself. And so they continued to strike him until he thought he wasn't a threat. But at some point, he wasn't a threat. The coroner's word for what had happened to him, he said his skull was pulverized, if that gives you an idea. It was much further than was necessary if he just wanted to kill the poor guy. And we're going to talk about what we found in the room and what we didn't find. And then I'm going to ask you all a question. So what was in the room? They found Ed's wallet. And inside the wallet, there was some interesting stuff. First, there was money, right? So if this person had come in looking for money, his wallet had some, and also there were things throughout the room that had value that a thief might have taken. There was also a clipping from a Cleveland Plain Dealer article, and it was about Helen Warren, and it said that she had obtained her divorce from her husband. So that would have been of interest to Ed. The clipping was about 2 weeks old. And lastly, there was a love letter to Ed's wife from his best friend Arthur. So this was also something that was quite telling. And the letter, the first paragraph said, "When I think of how he's treated you, I want to kill Ed Burdick." So this caught the police's attention right away. But let's see what else is in here, and then we'll talk about what they said. There were also photographs of Helen Warren and also Gertrude Payne. So she managed to like have her photo on a lot of things throughout this book and throughout the story. So I'm not totally surprised that that was there, but it was somewhat, I don't want to say it was like unseemly, but it wasn't the usual thing for a man to have pictures of a married woman in his den at the time. It was much more conservative time. There was a loaded gun right in Ed's housecoat pocket. He wasn't wearing a housecoat, but it was right in his pocket. And this was something that he had purchased only about 2 months earlier, maybe 3 months earlier, but somewhere right around there. And they said after he purchased it, he carried it everywhere. It was always with him. So if he was at work, if he was just out doing something in Buffalo, that gun was there. It's a little odd that he needed the gun to go read in his den at night. I mean, you don't usually have to arm yourself for an activity like that. But Ed had his gun with him. There was some food in the den, which was unusual, as we'll see in a little bit. It was partially consumed, all of it. So there was like the remnants of a little cocktail in there. There was a tart, and there was some cheese and crackers. And the last thing were the 2 golf clubs that were in the room. And Ed was the president of that golf club, so maybe it's not that big of a deal that there were a couple golf clubs in there. I don't think it was unusual for him to have them in his den. It's kind of his man room, so you could see how that might be. And there were also some things missing from the crime scene. 3, in fact. And then I'm going to ask you a question right after this one. The first thing was that Ed's gold watch was missing. He saw that it had been, he would have it set all the time, but it was always on him. It was just something he always wore. That was missing. There was a folder of evidence for the divorce hearing on March 3rd that was missing. This one's very significant. In New York at the time, and most of the country, it was very difficult to get a divorce. And you had to have a really good reason, and you had to have legal proof. And Ed had collected all of that. And now that folder that he had of information and evidence was gone. Nobody knew where it went. And the last thing that was gone was this bottle of mixed cocktails. And people had noticed him with it earlier. He had bought it earlier the day on February 26th, I guess. So the last day of his life, he bought it, he brought it home, and everybody saw it. So let's go here. And I have to tell you guys, I tend to get really interested in discussions. So I put this here for my own sake. Every time a minute goes by, there's going to be another candle. And when we get to the end of 5 candles, then we'll move on. But it just kind of helps keep us on track. So I've got a question. And when Dr. Kozlov and I talked about this earlier, we thought maybe we'll go to the room in Buffalo first and then ask people on Zoom and then kind of go back and forth. Does that still work?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So my question for you is, what stands out to you most about the crime scene? If you're here with the detectives, what are you thinking about? What do you notice?
That he was naked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the nakedness.
The nakedness.
Or was
That
it
played
a
an
frame
interesting
for a frame job? Was it a frame job?
The murder weapon is missing? No? Was it a golf club?
Wrapped in a quilt.
They
I thought
couldn't
it was.
tell.
I thought it was present.
He was covered with a quilt.
His head was wrapped up in a quilt, and he was covered, like the rest of his body was covered with like a rug and some pillows and things like that. And so it looked almost like maybe he had a date and it didn't go that well. Or it could have been something else. They weren't sure.
It was February in Buffalo. Warm if you're naked.
Absolutely. I could see why the nakedness and like that actually struck a lot of other people too. And that became kind of a key point when they did the inquest a little bit later. Any other thoughts or anything else stand out to you?
What's the murder weapon?
So they couldn't tell right away, but you're kind of setting me up because that's right where I'm going to go next as far as what they were looking at in the room, but there was nothing obvious. And they thought maybe this person had come in with a weapon, killed Ed, and then took the weapon with them. So it was like something they planned to do, not like a motive or a weapon of opportunity. So that was one of the first questions.
If you read the book, you know that he had something of a delicate stomach. And so the snacks there was indication that he was expecting a guest.
Oh.
Yes. Yes.
There was not a mix though, because those papers were missing. That would have indicated some people, there was the idea of somebody being there, but why? And then a burglary, why would they take the watch? There was so much misdirection. There wasn't really any clear, it wasn't trying, it was pointing at a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the watch would have been valuable, but the papers would kind of maybe prevent them from getting a divorce.
Right.
You know?
I think the misdirection is a great word for what we were seeing there. It seemed like the signs were pointing in lots of different directions, right?
Right.
The open windows and all that.
Well, those papers Arthur didn't want. He was threatening to make those papers public. All those papers that were missing were all those love letters that he had sent.
And that would have really embarrassed him if those came out.
Plus, to strike somebody that many times, they always say it's a crime of passion.
Yeah,
You don't have to kill somebody that many times.
and wrap in the head.
I'm concerned about why he was covered up.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a theory about that.
What's your theory?
Oh, well, I think to me, it seems to be a female crime. The watch was taken as an artifact, a kind of keepsake. The food was sort of female food, not what he would be eating. And then, to see a naked man. And I have a theory, it was the mother of Mrs. Hall, Mrs. Hall. She couldn't stand to see the naked body, and his fun organs out in the open. Out of decency, she couldn't handle it. She just covered his body up and wrapped his head too. That's very female to do. I think a man would hightail it out of there, but I'm not sure. That's
I'm thinking they had to remember the footsteps down the stairs.
Yeah.
I don't mind. They got it.
That sounds right to me. I mean, misdirection, certainly, and we're going to talk in just a moment about some other misdirection that's in here, but I think you nailed that.
No,
Yeah, we do.
Anyone else?
Okay. Oops, sorry. I've got a couple more questions to ask you as we go along, but I want to let you know some of the other things that they learned at the house, because there were some other things that had happened. They first interviewed Maggie Murray. She was the cook, and she was the last person to see Ed alive. And she was certain that he was home alone in his den, or not home alone, but he was alone in the den at 10:15 the night before. Maggie was an early bird. She liked to go to bed very early because she had to get up and make breakfast and everything for everybody every morning. And she had gone out that night, the night before, and it was unusual behavior for her. And she was a little bit concerned she wasn't going to make it at home on time. Mr. Burdick had a very strict 10:30 curfew, and everybody had to be home by then. And so she was a little bit worried as she was walking up, and she got into the kitchen. She closes and locks the door behind her, and she looks at the clock, and it's 10:14, somewhere right around there. But she was under the wire. She was definitely home by the curfew. And she saw Mr. Burdick because he came rushing out of his den when he heard somebody. And he saw it was Maggie, and they just kind of looked at each other and then looked away and pretended it didn't happen because Mr. Burdick was in his underwear and he was kind of a formal guy. So I don't think they would have normally seen him in his underwear. And he was just kind of like, let's pretend that didn't happen. And he went back into his den and he shut the door about halfway. So she knew he was home. And she didn't think anybody else was there because there were no voices, there was no talking. And if there was, he probably would have shut the door all the way, But he didn't do that. and she went upstairs to her room, but she went to sleep very quickly. And the last sound she heard was the sound of coal being added to the furnace. And if you've ever heard that sound, it's very distinctive. My grandparents had a coal furnace, and I remember like the sound of it. It's kind of like a sharp sort of sound, but it's comforting if you're familiar with it, and it just means like your house is going to be warmer. So she heard that right before she dropped off to sleep. And when they asked her about those mixed cocktails, she was like, "Yeah, I remember Mr. Burdick brought them in. I remember that very clearly because he can't drink alcohol. He had Mr. Burdick had a very delicate stomach." And so she kind of tapped through everything that they said that they found in the den. And she was like, "Yeah, he can't have cocktails. He can't have a tart. He couldn't eat cheese. He had a lot of dietary issues, I guess." And she said that she didn't even think, like, nobody ever ate in the den. Like, they would go eat in a different room. Nobody ever even ate there. And she didn't even think he would know where the tarts were. So she was surprised to hear about all of that. And then they asked her, "Well, how was the body found? How did this go down in the morning?" And she told them kind of an amazing story. So she said she woke up and, she went to bed and it was all cozy and warm. And when she woke up, the house was freezing, very cold. And she goes downstairs and she notices that the furnace isn't running anymore, even though he just filled it up. It wasn't running. And she's wondering, like, how did it get so cold so fast? And she walks downstairs, and what do you know? The front door is just standing open. And if you look into the Burdicks very much, they were a very formal kind of family. And they were probably the type of family that wouldn't even have like the front door open with a screen door when it was like summertime. I don't think they would have even done that. But for the door to just be standing open like that was a little bit odd. And she, pokes her head out. She's looking around, and there's no sign of anybody. She thought maybe Mr. Burdick went outside to get something, but there was no sign. And she didn't see anybody standing around, so she just closed the door. And she's, thinking about this. This is very odd. And the temperature was 22 degrees. So it wouldn't have been comfortable for anybody to leave the door open. And she's thinking about it. She goes back to the kitchen to start breakfast. So this is the back of the house. And I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but like it is right under the back window closest to the right. And there's a cross under it. That was the cross of the back window that was open. So the door was open and then the back window was open. And it looked like somebody had broken in by crawling in the back window and then they ran out the front door. So she's panicked, it was very unusual. There, like I said, there's very low crime in this area, particularly here. This was like an area where nothing really happened like that. She runs upstairs and she's going to tell Mr. Burdick. She's going to say, "Thieves are in the house." And she knocks. There's no answer. She knocks again on his bedroom door. No answer. And then she cracks the door open and sees something very odd. The gas light is still burning in his room, and the bed hasn't been slept in. So he had gone upstairs after work. He had changed it to his pajamas and gone downstairs to read, but he never came back upstairs. So she's very nervous about this. And she sees Mrs. Hull. This is Alice's mother here. And see, she looks a little bit stern. But she goes over and she talks to Mrs. Hull.
I know.
And she tells her about the thieves. She's like, "There's been thieves here and I can't find Mr. Burdick." And then she's thinking while she's talking to him, she was like, "Wait a minute, he was in the den last night. He's probably down in the den. He might have fallen asleep." And I could not find that was typical behavior for him. Like he was just one of those people who fall asleep in the den sometimes, but they figured that's where he must be. So they go downstairs. And this picture isn't in the book if you've read the book, but it would be really hard to look at on a little piece of paper, but hopefully you can see it kind of plainly here. It's just a cutaway of the house, and it shows where Ed's bedroom was up on this top floor, and then the den was directly below it, and then the cellar with the furnace is in the very bottom part. So they go downstairs to the den, but now the door isn't half shut. It is closed all the way. And Mrs. Hull says, "Maggie, go in there and see what's happening." And Maggie's like, No, no, sir. Like she had a bad feeling and she wasn't going to go in there. And Mrs. Holt definitely didn't want to go in. So they were kind of standing there at a loss for a second. And Mrs. Holt opens the door somewhat dramatically, but it's completely dark on the inside. Not even like a little bit of shading here, like where it's like maybe some lights filtering in through the blinds. It's completely dark. And Mrs. Hull screams out, Ed, Ed, Ed. And there's no answer. So she pulls the door shut and she looks at Maggie and she's like, breakfast is at 8. And I need you to make breakfast, serve it, and then go to the corner and call Dr. Marcy. That was their family doctor. She said, go to the corner and call Dr. Marcy after that and tell him that that Ed is sick. And Maggie does what she's told because she has to, because she works there. But she's thinking this is really odd. They have a phone in the house, right? And maybe if he needed help, like if he had, say, a stroke or something, what if he couldn't answer, but he needed help? But she has to do what Mrs. Hull says. And Mrs. Hull does tell her, like, I don't want the children to hear anything. I don't want the children to get freaked out and to hear that, maybe their father's sick. It's just worrying them unnecessarily. So Maggie does what she's told. And that's where her part of the story ended. But Dr. Marcy, this is their family doctor, Dr. Marcy, his comes in, and also Dr. Howland, who was the coroner who called. And what they learned that day from Dr. Marcy and Dr. Howland, he described coming in and finding the body. One odd thing that happened was when he got to the house, Mrs. Hull was waiting outside of the den, and she said, I don't want to go in there. And he says, okay, I'll do it. And he walks in, and remember how there was a chair right in front of the door? So Dr. Marcy immediately trips over it because, it's completely dark in there, and he kind of falls across the room to the window, and he grabs the blind and they come down in his hands. So like the blinds kind of shatter at his feet. And I bet you he had nightmares for the rest of his life when he turned around and saw this dreadful crime scene in front of him, because he said there was blood and brain matter everywhere. And he wasn't positive it was Ed. It was a man who was about 5'3", and he was pretty sure it was Ed, but he has to unwrap the head and make sure. And he was like, yes, it's Ed. So he goes out and he tells Mrs. Hull, and she says, okay, I'll tell the children. And he said, okay, I got to call the coroner. So that's what happened there. And Dr. Holland's standing there, and he's more of a quiet, observant kind of guy. And they ask him about the golf clubs. They're very concerned. What is this murder weapon? Who did this to Ed? And what did they use? Did they need like a poker or like some kind of heavy thing? And a golf club only weighs 2 pounds. So they're a little bit skeptical that a golf club could do all that damage. But Dr. Holland says, no, it could. Like if you lift it over your head and you bring it down in a motion like that, it's the velocity of it that makes it heavier. And that could really hurt somebody. Even a single strike, like they said, that probably would have killed Ed. And Dr. Marcy, though, Dr. Howland left after that. After the police were done talking to him, Dr. Marcy didn't. And he stuck around. And this is one of those things that doesn't make sense to us in 2026 anymore. But he was such a pest to the police that they curtailed their investigation for the day just because he kept getting in their way. And now we think like, well, why didn't they just order him out? And they did try, but he wouldn't go. So when the police tried to question the family, Dr. Marcy would answer. He would just kind of sail in. And they said, we want to hear from Mrs. Hull. We want to hear from Marion, the daughter. We want to hear from these people. And he was like, no, they're too sick. I'm going to talk for them. They've had a terrible shock. Mrs. Hull has a bad heart. And we don't need to have you talking and interviewing them. And when the police persisted, he said, well, then I want them to have legal representation. And the police were completely floored. They were like, they're not under suspicion. But he got in the way repeatedly. But before the police left, they did find one other interesting thing. And that was they found evidence that they thought that the scene was staged. In the first place, this back window that we looked at, it was a heavy snowfall the night before. And there were no footprints in the snow. So somebody had just opened the window brush some of the snow out to make it look obviously like somebody had been there and they had been there as a thief. Also, all these valuables were left in sight, like how could a thief come in there? And even if it was like he wasn't expecting to have to murder anybody, but he did, like you would think he would then take whatever he was there for. But he didn't. Nobody did. So I believe that leads us to our second question. After Mrs. Hull and the little girls went to sleep that night, Ed went downstairs to spend the evening in his den. So the police, ruled out the idea that maybe it had been a robbery or a theft. And they came down to two ideas and they looked different, but there was evidence to support both of them. So the first one was that they thought Ed might have had a date. He was naked, he had his pajamas out, there were cocktails, things like that. And they thought, well, maybe he had a date and it just went really badly. And then the other thing was that he feared for his life. What do you all think? What do you think he was expecting that night? He was expecting something, wasn't he?
Okay.
I find it memorable.
Welcome.
Yeah, what if, Mrs. Hall, when she sent Maggie to the store, she came in and she staged all that. Do you know what I mean? So that really, did he expect someone or did he not? And she made it look as though he had expected someone.
She could have. She very well could have done that. She
You
might
know?
have even done it before Maggie ever came outstairs.
He bought the bottle of cocktail mix.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was expecting someone.
Oh, okay, that was okay. Yeah.
The real crazy thing in all this is he was carrying a gun and he feared somebody and we never found out who he feared. And he had a business. Was it somebody, one of his employees?
I think it was the man he feared was the man who was having an affair with his wife.
I don't understand why he had to be.
Yeah, but he said he was a wuss in plain English.
Yeah, he did say that, he wasn't afraid of him.
He said that, but he was afraid of somebody or else he wouldn't have a gun, right?
Maybe he was afraid of the mother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah.
My
I think that
theory
maybe
is-
if Ed was afraid of somebody or something, expecting something, he seemed like a pretty stand-up guy. He would have probably taken his family out of the house and his kids out of the house and probably wouldn't have left them in any type of danger. But the loaded gun is very odd. So he did probably have that for self-defense or feel a little uneasy in his own home.
That's a really good point that like if he did expect somebody to come over to hurt him, like why did he leave his family and that like they could have afforded to go to a hotel?
That is a good point.
And there was another clinker in this. There was a man seen outside by a delivery boy or something, and he didn't recognize him as Arthur or anybody. It's part of this.
Right.
They
And-
never identified him.
And so maybe Ed felt that whoever he was afraid of was after him and not the family. Like he didn't think that they would attack the family at all, but because they know that this person just wanted him.
I think it was a conspiracy. I think they led him to believe that the woman he was attracted to and whose divorce was finalized was going to come. But in reality, it was someone who really wanted to do him in all along. And so it was some sort of conspiracy, whoever was behind it. I don't know.
See, my theory is that the mother-in-law was worried if the divorce went through,
Right.
She'd be out on the
she'd
street.
be out on the street.
Exactly.
An older woman, they didn't have social security or Medicare or anything.
Mhm.
So that was her omnipresent fear. If they really go through with the divorce, I'm gonna be poor, I'm gonna be on the street.
And she
And I
wanted
like
the
that.
daughter back home too.
Right, and so I think it was a crime of passion. I think she walked in on him and whoever his date was, eating the tart and drinking. And
The
it was.
tart ate the tart.
And she got ballistic and or the woman, whoever, but that's where it's kind of shaky. Because you would think that person come forward. Maybe that person, that date rushed out embarrassed and she got into an argument with Ed, who was still naked, so this is coming apart, isn't it?
Yeah, but what if it was Arthur's wife there? What if it was Arthur's wife there? She had her
Right.
skin in the game too, because they were all hush hush about everybody. There's a lot of people that seemed to know what was
Well,
going
and I'm
on.
wondering if the coal had to be built up to burn that file with all the divorce.
Yeah, they were thinking that was
Wasn't
burnt.
naked. Didn't they find evidence that his underwear was pulled off him after he was bloody?
Yeah, they
And
found a
they corrected-
fingerprint.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they found a
On the
fingerprint.
waist part of
Yeah.
his
Oh, yeah,
underwear.
the bloody finger.
But they didn't have
Yeah.
fingerprinting back then. Yeah, the whole thing was, it seems like there's more than one person involved in this.
Yeah, maybe
Conspiracy, yeah,
conspiracy.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and it's definitely an inside job, because they knew where the food was and all that.
Yeah.
But what happened to the liquor bottle? Why is that such? Because they thought that was the weapon. Was that a misdirect too?
I think that I asked Detective Lisa Redmond about this. This was one of the things I've never been able to figure out about that, why that liquor bottle was so important. And she told me that it was probably the brand they were looking for, because people had their own brands. Like, you know how people smoke a certain brand of cigarettes? She said people have like a certain brand of alcohol that they might like, and that would give them a clue.
Out of that.
Yeah, but what, was it a situation where Ed couldn't stomach alcohol? I mean, was he a drinker or?
He was not. He couldn't have it. He had a very delicate stomach.
Could it have been, that Chanel, the wife's lover, his best friend? Because if he went there, because Ed was not afraid of him at all, but he always carried a gun with him in case of it. But he said to his partner, he wasn't afraid of him. And what if he planted those pictures? Because during the divorce, he wanted to counter that divorce and say,
That's right. That's a really good point.
That's why it seems like a conspiracy. There's too many people that had their.
so between Pennell and his mother-in-law.
Sure.
There we go.
Yep.
Let's take a look at what the police found, because their investigation wasn't over. But first, let me ask you all, if you were like, hold up 1 to 2 or 3 fingers, depending on what you think. Who are we looking for here? Who did this? Was it a woman he knew, a man he knew, or a stranger?
One.
One, two. Okay.
3.
Do we have a 3?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So got some competition here. Let's see what we can find out. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more. The first thing police wanted to do was find out about who Ed was. And he really had like humble beginnings. And I think that's why he was so well liked, because he hadn't always had money and he was very generous. He was born in Canastota, which is about, Google Maps is right, it's about 170 miles east of Buffalo. It was a small place and they didn't have a lot of work. He didn't have a lot of, he wasn't able to necessarily find a job to support himself. So when he was about 18 or 20, somewhere around there, he came to Buffalo and he got an entry-level job at the Buffalo Envelope Company. And this was what their seal looked like back then. I don't know if they still have one or not, but they had a little seal. And he was working as a stenographer. Almost anybody could get a job as a stenographer at the time, but Ed really impressed them. He was bright and he was curious and he did really well there. He did well enough to get married, and he married Alice Hull in January 1886. And this is another example of something that would have surprised everyone who knew them, because they were fancy, they were fancy people, but they had a very modest little ceremony. It was in Alice's father's living room, and they didn't have any wedding attendants. Alice didn't wear a veil, and it just seemed like it was very simple. And then they had like a catered supper afterwards to celebrate. And then they moved into a tiny little apartment further down the road from where Alice's parents lived, and they didn't have a lot of money either. So it was all very modest, but they were happy. And Ed just became more and more successful at the envelope company, kept climbing the ladder. And as he became the president and the co-owner of the place, he really had a lot of prominence. There was even, I wasn't able to verify it, but I did see one thing that said that he was consulted just as part of a citizens council about the Pan American Exposition. And he was important. People wanted his opinion and they valued him a lot. So that's where he started. They did trace his marital troubles back to January 1st, 1901. That's not when they actually began, but it's when Ed found out about them. So he and Alice were having a New Year's Day party, and everybody from their friend group was over there, and they're all, having a great time until Carrie turns up and she pulls Ed aside and she tells him, I want to let you know that my husband, Arthur, your best friend, is having an affair with your wife. And Ed didn't believe it. He was, no, no, that is not happening. You are mistaken. But Carrie was sure of it. And she even told him they were out yesterday. She gave him a time. It was very, very specific. And Ed was like, no, he didn't believe any of it. But it ate away at him all night. All night he was not really having a great time after that. And then when their guests left, he talked to Alice and he said, hey, Gary told me the craziest thing. You're going to laugh. And she didn't laugh and she didn't get mad and she didn't have a reaction like you would think that she might have. She was like, oh, she told you that. And he starts thinking, and all of a sudden there are all these things that are coming back to him because we notice things, but maybe they don't really make an impression on us until it fits with something else. And he recalled that Alice often had this tin box with her. It had a lock on it. She just had it with her a lot. And he never really wondered about it until now. And then he was like, what is in that tin box that you're always looking at? And so he says, go get it. And she very reluctantly gets it. And then he makes her open it. And inside there is proof, lots and lots of proof that she's been having an affair with Arthur. And it's been going on for years. So since I think 1898. So by the time Ed found out about it, it was 3 years in. And there's no shortage of evidence. And Ed was devastated by this. He was very hurt by it. And after some time, it was maybe about May, I think. And she said, no, it's done, it's over. But then she found out or Ed found out that Alice was still seeing Arthur. And he tells her, you have to leave. I think one of the things that was worst about this for him was he noticed she replaced her wedding ring with a ring that Arthur gave her.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And very cold thing to do. One of the things that is most interesting to me about the whole story are the letters between Ed and Alice. They're the most amazing things because usually when we think of people from this era, Victorian, Edwardian, they're very buttoned up, everything's very proper. Like, I shall see you at the train station, have missed you very much. And that would have been like a very effusive letter, but not these letters. These letters were pretty stark. And I don't want to have a ton of them in here because it would be a lot to read. But there were some things like this, he said, if you tried, like you could tell he really didn't want to get a divorce and he wanted to believe her, but he didn't. And Alice, not so much. So she was like, I'll return. I'm not going to see Arthur anymore. He'd heard that before. And it wasn't true, but she said it again. She's like, oh, I'm not gonna see him anymore. Don't worry. And there was a lot of back and forth about this, and like this one I thought was really interesting. They said, I have no confidence in you. You've done everything to prove you can't be trusted. And these were quite long and vivid letters. So Alice starts doing this thing where she's like, stop hurting the children with my affair. Like I want to come back. And she's living at this very nice place. It's a resort kind of hotel, but at home, she's got her friends, she's got her mother, she's got her children, she's got her servants. She doesn't have to do anything. And she's got her friend group. So she wants to come home. And she's just basically disclaimed any kind of, like, it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's between you and Arthur. Yeah, right?
Boy.
But he did tell her, according to Alice, he said that he would do anything for her. And Ed's like, tell him to move. And then all of a sudden, he wasn't going to do anything for her. He was going to stay in Buffalo. So Ed did let her come home. in June 1901. However, won't get into exactly how he did it right now, but like he had devised a method of being able to read any letters Arthur sent to his wife. He figured out a way to do that. And as soon as he did, it revealed everything she'd been saying to him was just a deception. Their affair had never stopped. And they were still, it was just sort of like, well, how are we going to get around Ed? You know, that was the posture for them. So Ed hires a private detective. He's going to have them shadowed. He's going to have them followed. So like I said, it's hard to get a divorce at this time. And one of the only ways to get it is if you could prove infidelity. So Ed had enough money to hire detectives that they just followed Alice around everywhere. And they would meet on street corners, like, oh, who knew you would be here? You know, and they already had it all planned out. They would meet on these little street cars and things. And there was a lot of evidence. And at one point, they had code names for things. Arthur was very scared of getting caught. And so one of the places they nicknamed was like 123. So he said, I'll meet you at 123 tomorrow. But the detectives had been following them around long enough. They already knew where 123 was. So they showed up there with Ed and they banged on the door. There's a lot of scuffling inside. And then Arthur comes to the door. Oh, hi, Ed. How are you? And he's like, I want to see Alice. And he's like, Alice isn't here. And Ed forced his way into the room. He's looking around and Alice was not there. And it was because she jumped out the back window when she heard him coming. Guess where she went? Can you guess?
Oh, church, wasn't it church?
Oh, yeah.
She went to church. Where else? So that's where she was. And when she came home, he told her, no, no, this is it. You are leaving and this is over. Our marriage is over. And she went reluctantly, but it wasn't a thing where she thought that she was really getting divorced. She was like, well, we've been through this before. It's okay. But after she got back to the Hotel Traymore, she was served with divorce papers. And at this time, wasn't communicating with her so much. There weren't so many letters back and forth. There were a few. So the detectives have learned all this stuff. And then they're thinking about, like, well, what about these other angles of things? And one of the things they want to find out about it, Ed's business partner, maybe this guy had, a chance to profit off of Ed's death. Just because he had this salacious personal life doesn't mean nobody else had a motive. And they go to see Charles Park, and they don't see anything odd about him, but he does tell them a little story. And he says, Arthur Pennell was here to visit about a month or so ago. And I believe Arthur showed up thinking that he could just talk Ed into, you know, overlook it. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to embarrass each other. You don't want a divorce. You're not going to do that to your children. And Ed was very much like, no, 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 no. I've done this with you too many times. So he wasn't interested in that. And Arthur got very upset and he threatened to kill Ed. Then he threatened to kill Alice, and then he threatened to kill himself. And Charles Park had overheard all of this. So he tells the detectives that, okay, well, I walked over to him after Arthur left and I told him, hey, we should report this to the police. You should get a gun. He's trying to get Ed to take some precautions. But Ed said, there's nothing to worry about. Arthur's a coward.
Mhm.
And that was it. He just kind of shrugged off the whole threat and he didn't seem that scared. But it wasn't too long after that before he got himself a revolver and started carrying it everywhere. So there were a few things happening. And this was right leading up to the time when the divorce was going to be finalized on March 3rd. Ed had his stack of evidence and he had everything he needed and he was mentally ready for this to happen. He sent Alice a letter and he said, I'm sorry for you now. I don't want to be with you. I'm sorry for you. But, hopefully life will be good with you and Arthur. So he was done with her and I think it was obvious. But he was getting these letters. The first one comes from Alice. So, she was like, well, what about me? What about my future? What if Arthur doesn't want to marry me? What am I going to do? And Ed could very understandably kind of shrug that off at this point. He didn't necessarily want to be talking with Alice and he didn't really care that much, but he said, I'm going to do everything I can to make your life happy and comfortable. He wasn't really vindictive, But Alice was still trying to play the card about like, well, the kids are going to be really upset when they find out. But I mean, this is all Alice. Ed had given her so many chances. He also got this letter from Carrie. This is not the first letter that Carrie had written. And Ed was really frustrated by this because he said, Carrie was the one who told me about this whole thing. And if she hadn't said anything, I wouldn't even know. And now she wants me to like call the whole thing off. And that's what she was saying. She was saying basically like, you should do the Christian thing and let your wife come back. What about your children? And there is something to what she was saying. There was a lot of shame around divorce at the time, and it might have reflected a little bit on the children. I don't think it would have been so much. It wouldn't have ruined them by any stretch of the imagination, but it just wasn't common then. And so maybe there was something to it, but Carrie was very motivated because if Ed and Alice got divorced, so Alice is now a divorcee and she's divorced everybody for Arthur and everybody knows it. What's to stop Arthur from being like, well, then I've got to marry Alice, like, because now my reputation is, now it's kind of in question too. So she was worried about that. Carrie had plenty of money. She didn't need Arthur, but she didn't want to get divorced. So she was writing Ed these letters too. And his murder occurred then 4 days before the court date that would have finalized their divorce. So officially, Alice is his widow, not his ex-wife. All right.
Lucky Alice.
Yeah, she scored.
She got lucky.
It was lucky, and if you look at it that way, it might be more than luck. It might have been formed that way. So let's look at some of the suspects real quick. So first there was J.B. Warren. So he probably blamed Ed to some degree about his divorce. Could that clipping in Ed's wallet, maybe that was his calling card. Here, you got my divorce, so I'm just going to leave this here with your body. Something like that. It could have been something cold. And they found him and interviewed him. And he was like, well, I didn't have anything to do with it, but he got what he deserved. He had it coming. So there was like zero regret. And this was front page news. And that was how it showed up in the papers. Arthur also had a reason to kill Ed. He valued his reputation. And there was something he wrote in the book, and it was like he was writing to a friend and he was really trying to defend himself. Like, I don't have anything to do with it. I was trying to help his poor wife. Like he left out the part about their affair, but he was like, I was just trying to help her, get her divorce and everything. But his reputation was very important to him. And he was a very intense, kind of moody person, but maybe not violent. I don't know. It depends. There's a possibility Helen Warren did it. What if she got divorced from her husband to be with Ed? She went over, they have their date, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, I don't want to get married again. I just got divorced. She might have done something like that. And she got really furious. That's another possibility. Gertrude Payne, he didn't have a romantic kind of fixation with her, but she borrowed a lot of money from him. What if he called in her debts? She wasn't going to look stupid or like she had not had all of that money herself. Appearances were very important to Gertrude. And then there was Carrie. Does Carrie want to get divorced? No, definitely not. I think when she told Ed this about the affair, she was imagining he was going to put a stop to it. And that didn't happen at all. And I don't think in her wildest dreams she thought that he would just divorce his wife. And then there was Alice. Alice could have done it, but not by herself. So she wouldn't have taken the train over there. I don't think she could have gotten there that fast, but she could have hired somebody to do it. She had plenty of money for that. And I don't think a whole lot of love for Ed either. So it could have been any of these people that were in this little friend group. So show of hands, who thinks someone here murdered Ed?
Hard to say.
They didn't put the mother-in-law.
I think.
The mother-in-law? Yeah.
Yeah.
Looked like a bitch.
She had a lot to lose too,
She was a little more than anybody.
I'm concerned about the nature of the crime.
The nature of it?
The mother-in-law doesn't strike me as the person who would do that because if you look at something like the Lizzie Borden case, and there were 18 axe blows, and then for the mother and 11 for the father. And when I've talked about that case, and I've said to people in the audience, I want you to start chopping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you start to slow down. And if he had between 12 and 20 blows, possibly with a golf club, and I would be curious to see any crime scene photos to see the position of his hands. But if he was, the person who did that did have a personal stake in it to do it that much. And then to wrap him up, maybe to undress him, and I've got to read the book at this point. So, but the mother-in-law doesn't strike me as the person who would do that. Most of the women would not do it like that. The exception, actually would be somebody like Lizzie Borden, and there must have been another stake in it.
What if she hired somebody though?
But it could be murder for hire.
It
Although,
could be.
yeah, and a man was hired. There may have been another man that Arthur didn't know about.
It was two hired
That Alice
detectives,
turned-
they never investigated them. You know, some of those detectives are shady people. He could have been hired. And there's a bunch of people with money in here.
Right, and
Mary, what is your theory? You said conspiracy.
I think he thought he was going to meet Helen and therefore got ready for Helen coming. But it was conspiracy. He was set up, he's on the brink of his divorce. He always had a passion for the woman who is now divorced herself. And so, but I don't think he was ever going to come. I think it was just a ruse.
Yeah, sort of.
Where did the food come from?
He brought food.
The food was all from inside the house.
But who set it up?
Well, I think it was
That's
set
the
up
question.
afterward.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Hull and the doctor, I think she used the doctor. Dr. Marcy, didn't he say, let's make it a suicide?
Yeah.
He certainly did.
Well, it could have
Certainly did.
definitely been.
No, I didn't.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute if that doesn't sound familiar.
Ben, doctor, if you would have gone in, then you would have called the
I
doctor.
gotta go have food on my Kindle tonight.
I think you're right. But I think he thought he was having company that night.
Boy, this is intriguing.
It is intriguing.
Yeah.
And I just have to commend you on your research. It's really remarkable.
yeah,
Right.
Thank you. Well, let's see what else they discovered with their investigation, because you mentioned something that they discovered. So they found this gentleman. His name was Alfred Brookman, and he was the furnace repairman. He had actually been taking care of the Burdick's furnace a few weeks earlier, and Ed had hurt his hand. And so then when Ed's hand healed, he was like, no, I can take care of it from now on. But the furnace was in good working order a couple weeks earlier. And so the maid, when they found out that the furnace wasn't working, they didn't know anything about the murder. She saw him in the yard next door, and she lifted up the window and she said, hey, you have to come over. And he was like, okay, I got other people, but I'll come over after that. So he comes over and he goes into the cellar and he finds that the cellar's burned all the way down. And he was like, well, that's weird. He didn't know that somebody had filled it up the night before, because that makes it even weirder. But he went behind the furnace. And this is one of those big old style furnaces. They're the octopus furnace, I think they're called. And he was behind it. He's got his tools and everything. And they asked him about that missing cocktail bottle. They're very interested in that. And it showed up a lot in the papers too, which always struck me as kind of odd. Like, how would you know it's that bottle? You know, presumably they've manufactured more than one. But he said, you know, if it was in the furnace, it would have melted. Like, you won't be able to find it. And they said, all right. And while they were talking to him, though, he mentions, just in passing, you know, that day I was back there and I was fixing the furnace and I dropped a tool and it made a big loud noise on the floor. And he heard a man go, who's there? And he pokes his head out. He's like, it's just me, it's Alfred. And Mrs. Hull was standing there in the cellar with this man. And she said, oh, that's just Alfred. Don't worry about him. And she's talking to this man. And they're like, well, what were they saying? Who was he? And he was like, I don't know, because Alfred was hard of hearing. He didn't even know they were down there until the man yelled, like, who's there? And then they show him some pictures, like, was it this man? Was it this man? He's like, I don't know. And they're like, are you sure it was Mrs. Hall? And he's like, I'm sure it was her. So this was maybe like an hour or so after they found the body. If like when he gave them the time, he had no idea that a body was found. So he was just down there fixing the furnace. But that's what he told them. And so then they're kind of curious and they're recalling that Dr. Marcy was awfully strange during their investigation that day. You remember he was preventing them from talking to the family, he was answering for them. And so they decide, why don't we go see Dr. Howland? Did he notice anything odd? And Dr. Howland's like, yeah, I noticed something odd. So he tells them about an extraordinary request he got. And it was from Dr. Marcy, the family doctor. So Dr. Marcy called him. He's the coroner. And so you have to understand the coroner has to be called if there's a death. And he has to certify it. It's got to be the coroner. So the doctor couldn't do it. He couldn't certify the death without the coroner. And so he calls Dr. Howland. He's like, come on over. My patient died. And so he meets him in the hallway. He takes his coat. And he was like, hey, before you go in there, I just wanted to talk to you for a moment. So they go into one of the other rooms and they're talking. And he's like, I'd just like you to say this is a suicide. And Dr. Holland is looking, he was like, is it a suicide? Because it's an odd request, a very odd request. And Dr. Marcy's like, well, you'll have to see for yourself, but I hope you will make it a suicide. And Dr. Holland thinks the whole thing's quite odd. And suddenly Dr. Marcy starts talking about the Burdick children. So they're all girls. Told you they were like 10, 13, and 15. And he said, well, you have to consider the girls and who they're going to marry. Like their marriage prospects could be impacted by this. So can you please say it's a suicide? And Dr. Howland is completely puzzled. He's like, I'm the coroner, like I'm not like the debutante ball organizer. And he was like, I mean, I don't know. So he goes into the den where Dr. Marcy leads him. And the first thing he sees is Ed's body on the couch with the head wrapped up. And he goes, was the head wrapped up when you found the body? And Dr. Marcy's like, mm-hmm. So he goes over and he unwinds it and he sees poor Ed, his head was destroyed. And he just looks up at the doctor like, nobody would ever believe this is a suicide. Nobody. But it's significant. And the reason why it's significant is because if it was a suicide or if it was a natural death, then the police would need to be called. So if Dr. Howland said, yeah, that looks like a suicide to me, I'm concerned about their marriage prospects, then nobody would have ever known about this. So there was a method to Dr. Marcy's madness here. He really did not want the police to be called. And that was, I thought that was probably one of the craziest things about the book. And this is my last question for you all. Why do you think Dr. Marcy acted like that?
Money.
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 The mother.
Collusion with the Mrs. Hall.
Yeah, he was paid.
Yeah, that's
He
so
was
reasonable.
paid.
The mother-in-law.
With mother-in-law.
Yeah.
It was the mother-in-law. Yeah.
Well,
And the, what?
And whoever else is in
And
it.
the parlor.
right.
Because he was so concerned about the girls.
He was very concerned about their murder.
He could have murdered him. Ed knew him.
Marcy did it.
He could have. In collusion.
Anything else?
So now her mother-in-law.
Like a passion.
Or he had a good idea.
At the table, what are you deciding?
Oh, down here?
Yeah.
I think he was in cahoots with Mrs. Hall, the mother-in-law.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
think. And whether
think
he was paying him, I don't know.
In cahoots with Alice.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Well,
With Mrs. Hall, the mother-in-law.
And probably Alice too.
And probably,
Close to
yeah.
her mother.
Yeah.
Well, the three of them are involved. I'm concerned about that because favorite Ben Franklin quote is, we can keep a secret only if two are dead. I suspect collusion and possibly then Mrs. Hall, the doctor. But he must have had a motive. She would have a motive as the mother-in-law to secure her daughter's position as inheritor of the estate. And that would secure her. And she needed somebody to do it, and maybe she was getting busy with the doctor.
Yes, you could have.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Pay him off.
that's
Well,
possible.
if you haven't read the book, we won't spoil it by sharing the other curious events that happened. But there are many interesting unsolved riddles in this book, and it was really, first of all, it was just a delightful read. I want to thank you,
Yeah.
Kimberly, for bringing
Oh,
it.
thank you. Thank you very
And
much.
again, if you've not read it, you'll want to read it.
Do they
because
ever
She really
secure,
reconvene and go over all of it, but we're not
Yeah.
giving any spoilers out.
Kimberly, did they ever,
Case.
Kimberly, did they ever keep the end of it, the evidence, you know, the underwear was evidence? They had fingerprints. Did they ever keep any of that, or is that all gone too?
No, I don't think that they did. And I really looked for this stuff. The Buffalo Police Department has an off-site area where they keep old evidence, and they have some things there, but I couldn't find that they had anything at all. And I want to let you know something interesting that I found out. Well, not found out, but Detective Lisa Redmond talked with me about the case. And for me, this was like Disneyland to get to talk with her and to hear what her thoughts were on the case, because not only was she a detective and a cold case homicide detective, and also one who worked in Buffalo, she worked on this case. It was part of her cold case investigations. And she told me something that it never even crossed my mind about this scene in the cellar. She said that she was like, does it strike you as peculiar that Mrs. Hull would take somebody to the cellar to talk to them? And I started thinking about it, and my grandparents lived in a house that was like kind of similar, that had like the furnace in the basement. And I thought, you know, if my grandmother had to talk to somebody in private, that's the last place she would go. She would never go downstairs to the cellar. And it didn't make any sense. And she was like, yeah, there's a reason she went to the cellar to talk to him. And I just found that to be really, really interesting, because I was like, you know what? What did she want to show him in the cellar? There was something.
Or get something out of this?
Yeah.
Make sure no one could hear them while they're chatting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids aren't into the
Right.
cellar. They might be afraid of the cellar. Got younger kids running around. The cellar would have a degree of privacy.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. Are there some comments in the chat that
There are just comments regarding where they could access the book. And I know that I got it from the
Oh, okay.
Public
I'll send
Library,
that after.
and it is on Audible. And
I got it on Amazon.
I got Amazon.
I got it on Amazon.
they're asking, is there another place besides Amazon where we could go?
Oh,
Thrifty books,
yeah.
thrifty books, or eBay. The thrifty was the cheapest. And when they were real fast, I got it in like 3 days.
So is it still considered a cold case?
It is cold case, so it's technically unsolved. I mean, I have a theory in the book that I have, but like the thing about this case is that there's other possibilities. You know, just because like I have one possibility, it doesn't mean something else couldn't have happened. This case continues to just twist and turn. There's actually some pretty big things that happened after all of the investigation. And I know we can't go any further tonight, but I want to see if you have any questions I can answer. I know we talked a little bit as we were going, but if you have anything that you just wanted to ask, I'm happy to answer anything now.
Why did you choose this case from San Francisco?
Well, I actually read about this case a long time ago. I have a website, and I write short stories mostly from the turn of the century. I'm just fascinated by that era. I think, you know, it was such an unusual age. It was like the old world and the new world were just kind of exploding, and the old world was passing away. And I don't know, it's very interesting to me. So I read about this. I was just kind of like scanning newspapers looking for a story that I could put on my website. And I found this one and I just kind of fell into this deep, dark hole looking at it. And it wasn't my first book, but later, it was 2020 and I was sick and also it was the pandemic. And I was like, well, I really want to write a second book. And I wrote this one and it's definitely my favorite. I think it's got the most going on, the most eternal kind of intrigue about it. And
Yes, Birchville Penny will be closing in 10 minutes.
okay.
We're gonna be
So anything else I could answer?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming.